Slavery. A historical and contemporary analysis. Slavery is one of humanity's darkest chapters, reflecting the depths of exploitation and dehumanization. It has existed for thousands of years and has left a profound impact on societies worldwide. From its historical roots to its modern forms, slavery persists as a stark reminder of inequality and the violation of human rights. This essay explores the origins of slavery, its evolution, and its enduring legacy in today's world. The origins and development of slavery. The institution of slavery dates back to ancient civilizations, where it was often tied to economic, political, and social structures. Early evidence of slavery can be found in Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. In these societies, slaves were typically war captives, debtors, or criminals. They were considered property and subjected to forced labor, often with little to no legal rights. In ancient Egypt, slaves worked in agriculture, construction, and domestic service. Similarly, in ancient Greece, slavery was an integral part of the economy. Greek philosophers like Aristotle rationalized the practice, arguing that some people were naturally predisposed to servitude. Rome's economy also heavily depended on slaves, who worked in mines, households, and as gladiators. The Roman Empire saw slaves as essential to its expansion and prosperity. With the rise of feudalism in medieval Europe, slavery evolved into serfdom. While serfs were not technically slaves, their labor and movements were restricted, and they remained tied to the land they worked. However, slavery persisted in other parts of the world. In the Islamic world, slaves were often obtained through warfare and trade, and many were employed in domestic roles or as soldiers. The transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade represents one of the most brutal periods in human history. Beginning in the 15th century, European powers such as Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands established colonies in the Americas. To meet the labor demands of plantation agriculture, they turned to enslaved Africans. The triangular trade system emerged, connecting Europe, Africa, and the Americas. European traders transported manufactured goods to Africa, where they were exchanged for enslaved people. These captives were then transported across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas in a journey known as the Middle Passage. Conditions during the Middle Passage were horrific. Enslaved Africans were packed tightly into ships, with little food, water, or space. Many died from disease, starvation, or abuse before reaching the Americas. Upon arrival, enslaved individuals were sold at auctions and forced to work on plantations producing sugar, cotton, tobacco, and other cash crops. Their lives were marked by extreme physical labor, harsh punishments, and the complete denial of basic human rights. Families were often separated, and cultural identities were systematically erased. The transatlantic slave trade lasted for over 400 years, resulting in the forced migration of an estimated 12 to 15 million Africans. It devastated African societies, disrupted economies, and left a legacy of racial inequality that persists to this day. The abolition of slavery. The abolition of slavery was a gradual process influenced by economic, social, and moral factors. By the late 18th century, the Enlightenment era sparked ideas about human rights and individual freedom. Activists, religious groups, and former slaves played crucial roles in the abolitionist movement. In Britain, figures like William Wilberforce and Olaudah Equiano campaigned tirelessly against the slave trade. The British Parliament passed the Slave Trade Act in 1807, outlawing the transatlantic slave trade, followed by the Slavery Abolition Act in 1833, which ended slavery in most British colonies. In the United States, abolition faced significant resistance, particularly in the southern states, where the economy relied heavily on enslaved labor. The abolitionist movement gained momentum in the 19th century, with figures like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Sojourner Truth leading the charge. The Civil War, 1861-1865, was a turning point, culminating in the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 and the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865, which abolished slavery. Elsewhere, countries like Haiti achieved abolition through revolution, while others, such as Brazil, ended slavery later, with the practice being formally abolished in 1888. Modern forms of slavery. Although legal slavery has been abolished, modern forms of slavery persist. Today, an estimated 50 million people live in conditions of modern slavery, which includes forced labor, human trafficking, debt bondage, and child exploitation. Forced labor occurs in industries such as agriculture, construction, mining, and domestic work. Human trafficking, a global problem, involves the recruitment and exploitation of individuals through coercion, fraud, or force. Victims are often forced into labor, sexual exploitation, or other forms of servitude. Child labor is another prevalent issue, with millions of children working under hazardous conditions. Debt bondage, where individuals are trapped in exploitative work to repay loans, remains widespread in countries like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Modern slavery is perpetuated by poverty, lack of education, corruption, and weak legal frameworks. Global supply chains also contribute to the problem, as goods produced through forced labor often make their way into international markets. The legacy of slavery. The legacy of slavery continues to shape societies around the world. In the Americas, the descendants of enslaved Africans face systemic racism, economic inequality, and social exclusion. The scars of slavery are visible in the racial wealth gap, disparities in education and healthcare, and ongoing discrimination. Efforts to address this legacy include reparations, education, and advocacy. Some countries and institutions have issued formal apologies and taken steps to acknowledge their roles in slavery. For example, the United Nations declared 2015-2024 the International Decade for People of African Descent, focusing on recognition, justice, and development. Conclusion. Slavery, in all its forms, is a violation of human dignity and freedom. Its historical roots are deeply ingrained, but its modern manifestations demand urgent action. Combating slavery requires a global effort to address its underlying causes, enforce human rights laws, and empower vulnerable populations. The story of slavery is a testament to humanity's capacity for both cruelty and resilience. By remembering this history and working to eradicate modern slavery, we can honor the struggles of those who suffered and build a future where freedom and equality are universal rights.